weekend with your kids not having?
It was good, actually, yeah.
That's good.
Good weather, too.
I saw her last week.
Okay, so
That's what happened to me. I saw her.
3:59,
And she told me,
according to Verizon.
You need to get a new clock or a new battery.
We're just, right,
I told her.
we talked about that the other day. Yeah, it's
Then I
4.
said, thank you for everything.
Yeah, that's what I got, it's 4 o'clock. So despite what the clock says, it is 4 o'clock according to a couple of people and a couple of resources. So we are here on Monday, the 27th of October, or 27th of September for a in-person and Zoom meeting to discuss short-term rentals and some questions that have arisen in regards to that. Before we get started, I would note that those of us sitting at the table have all been vaccinated, and the way we have been operating in this room is obviously we ask you to wear a mask when you come in this building, but if you are vaccinated and you're comfortable, you may remove your mask. I will remove mine, as I am doing now. It's up to you personally. However, if you're not vaccinated, we ask that out of courtesy that you continue to wear your mask. So as I said at the outset, we are here to discuss short-term rentals. We know that there are, we have rental licenses throughout the city for residential property, and many people take advantage of that. We're not trying to discourage rentals at all, but we are looking at the difference between short and long-term rentals, because there are different needs and requirements for people who are here for short-term basis versus longer year-round leases. So we recognize that there are many different private individuals that are renting on short-term basis, as well as corporations that are renting, and this is a subject that's being discussed nationwide. And if you've seen it in the media, you've read about it in the newspaper, and I think we've come to the point where we need to talk about it. And so we have a little bit of a workshop here, and then we'll get into a discussion. Janelle, are you going to take the lead in this, or Anne-Marie?
I think I am going to take the lead, but any one of us may chime in on various topics. So Kayla, if you can go to the next slide. All right. So, I mean, as the mayor said, this is kind of a growing issue. We're seeing more online platforms, a lot of different ways that people are reserving and utilizing short-term rentals. And I mean, I think one thing we can all agree on is that it seems like each year Lewis becomes more discovered. So we have more people coming here. It seems like during the pandemic it's grown significantly. And we're hearing from you as the elected officials, we're hearing from constituents about a number of issues that we really need to start to get our hands around before it gets too far ahead of us. So one is, you have quality of life issues, noise, parking. I'm looking at some people who might be here because of parking. If you have, if your residence has no off-street parking and it's grandfathered in that way, but you rent it out and 4 cars come to stay for the week, that really puts a burden on the residents in that community. So we're definitely hearing about that from people. And then crowding within homes, and again, that also relates to the issue of parking. There's also costs that the city incurs by the town being so popular. One, we struggle, and I'm looking at Dawn again. Sorry, Dawn. we struggle to keep our recycling contamination free so that we can discard it at the transfer station at no cost for tipping fees, and that the recyclable material can become recycled. Unfortunately, the recycling rules are a little nuanced, and some things are picked up some places and not others, and it's really a challenge, even with a stable population, to get people to understand what can and can't be recycled. What we do find is, certainly with the visiting population, our guys are pretty good about checking the carts before they dump them, and there are a lot of carts that we simply can't dump into the recycling because of the amount of non-recyclable material that's in there. So that's a cost to the city, because now we're one, it's a staff cost because we're having to check the cans, and two, we're now sending the trash truck behind the recycle truck, and then that results in a tipping fee as opposed to a $0 tipping fee, but it also means that we're not meeting our recycling goals of diverting waste from the landfill. I think several years ago, when we looked at trash service and we took the recycling service in-house, there was a big discussion, and you'll remember this, Mayor, where we talked about, did we really need the twice-a-week trash pickup during the summer? And the conclusion was, our year-round residents don't need twice-a-week trash pickup. What drives the need for twice-a-week trash pickup during the summer is the visitation. There's a lot of costs that the city incurs to maintain the beach, and then, of course, there's the police costs. So again, we welcome visitors. It's not intended to say that we don't welcome visitors. It's just that there are costs to the community, both out-of-pocket costs and quality of life things that we need to look at how we can manage so that we protect the quality of life and also protect the tax dollar. If you could go to the next slide.
While you're moving to the next slide, I think the other thing that's worth noting is that we've abandoned recycling on the beach because of the contamination that we see.
Exactly.
When we had recycle and regular trash, and we asked people to sort it, we finally ended up abandoning trying to have recycling on the beach because there was so much contamination.
And it was, ice cream is not recyclable.
That statement about the recycling on the beach doesn't apply to the residential area.
No,
It's just the
on the beach itself.
Right,
But again, that means that anything that gets thrown away in those beach trash cans, none of it gets diverted
Right.
from the landfill.
Right.
I personally will take my, if I have a plastic water bottle or a can or whatever, I'll take it home with me. I hate throwing that stuff away, but so if we are going to develop a strategy to manage short-term rentals, we have to look at a number of things. Right now, we have rental licenses and we have gross receipts rental tax, but it's just rentals. It doesn't differentiate between your short-term and your long-term. So if we want to begin to differentiate between them and regulate and manage them differently, we have to determine what is that length of stay that we would consider short-term. We currently have a relationship with a company called Host Compliance, and they monitor the online short-term rental platforms for us. And their definition for short-term rental is 180 days, which is 6 months. You can make the argument to make it a shorter period of time, but I think definitely 6 months is reasonable, but that would be something the council would need to determine.
May I ask a question about that, please?
Yes.
In that definition that the vendor provides, is the assumption that there is one renter during that 6-month period, or does that mean that the property could be rented out once a week, for a 6-month period?
So what they're saying is they're defining short-term rental as anything less than 6 months. So you could rent a place for 3 months or 4 months, and it's still considered a short-term rental.
Even though it's flipping every week?
Oh, a short-term rental, anything that flips every week is definitely a short-term rental.
Okay.
But for instance, if I find a house and say I'm going to live there from, April through December, that's more than 6 months, so that would not be considered a long-term rental. If I'm going to be there for 3 months or 4 months, that would be a short-term. So we need to figure out
Right.
in terms of if we're going to develop a policy that separates your short-term from your long-term, where do we draw that line?
Right.
A lot of places use 6 months, some use 4, some use 3.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to consider with that then is you need to have some type of enforcement around subletting.
Right.
If people sublet, what's the penalty for that?
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, and there, right, there's, the way I look at it, what we're doing this evening is kind of, we're starting at a baseline, trying to look at some of these simpler questions that we have to determine. And then based on that, staff will go back and will do additional research and come forward with other ideas. But you're right, enforcement's going to be important no matter what we do. The other thing is, once we do determine that line, say we decide it is 6 months, we need to, at the staff level, determine which of the rentals that we have in town fall in long-term versus short-term, and that's going to take some work. It's good, we can, there's some that we know are short-term that we can definitely figure that out. There's some that we know are long-term, but I would say the vast majority are going to take some research. I have talked to Austin, and I believe that the board's willing to work with us. For instance, if I have a lease and the utilities are in my name, I'm not a short-term rental.
Right.
So those are some of the tools that you would use to figure out which are which. But it's going to take some work, but it's something that I think we have the ability to do.
There are two comments. One is that I'm aware that some HOAs in condominium buildings in town are having the same kind of discussion regarding the idea that they're looking at a minimum of 6 months.
Right.
So there's that. And the other issue is, the sublet could, you have to be very specific about subletting.
Right.
Because a renter could sublet in some cases, not all
Right.
leases prohibit subletting. And one more comment is that we have for years asked on our rental license, is this a short or long-term rental? And I think Ellen Lorraine would concur that we very rarely get a response on that.
Right, right. But if we are managing them differently and regulating them differently, we're not going to be able to take a no response. We'll have to
Right.
get an answer.
Right. So we've tried to gain this information. It's not as though we...
Right, right, it's, right. We know that there's a degree of staff time that is going to be into going through and determining these things. It could be, the good thing with our host compliance relationship, they have a list of things that they've identified as short-term. So we could, that's simple. Places like Jefferson Apartments, we know are long-term. Mm-hmm. So, some of those things are easier to pull out, but, we don't have apartment complexes in town. Apartment complexes are typically long-term, but we don't have, we have...
With the schooner, that's about it.
Right, several small apartment management. There are questions that, and you mentioned there, the issue of some of the HOAs and condo associations are looking at, do they want to manage this as well? In the zoning side of it, there are things that you can consider. Are there certain residential zones where you simply don't allow short-term rentals? Again, if we're going to do that, we probably need to figure it out sooner rather than later because it'll get too far ahead of us. Do you want to have a minimum off-street parking that has no grandfathering? So if you don't have any off-street parking, you simply cannot have a short-term rental. Again, there will be some unhappy property owners, but these are the things that we're seeing and hearing.
Along that line, it was when we authorized bed and breakfasts, there was a requirement that any bed and breakfast had 4 off-street parking spaces, 1 for each of the room, up to 4 rooms that they could rent. And we have none of that in the short term, currently in our rental license.
Right, so those are, what is that minimum parking? Because with your regular residential use, the requirement is 2 off-street parking spaces, but if you can't fit it on the property, because we have so much of town that's old and built out before these regulations came into effect, there are a lot of places that are grandfathered. I mean, you have to determine, do you want to grandfather any short-term rentals that don't have off-street parking? I mean, that's a policy decision that'll need to be made. Do you want to give a maximum number of people, whether it's just a hard number, or whether it's, based on the number of bedrooms in the unit.
And that kind of, excuse
go
me,
ahead, sorry.
Maureen, that kind of speaks to what I was thinking about when we were talking about parking, off-street parking. It seems to me that there should be a correlation between capacity at a home and the number of units, parking spaces required,
Right.
For each
Right.
home.
Right.
Because we all know that these homes, no matter how small they are, the capacity is quite large.
Well, and again, from a short-term rental perspective, if you have we have some places in the downtown area where perhaps you have a short-term rental that has 1 bedroom.
Right. But yet it says it sleeps 5.
Right, but you also have other places in town where you might have a short-term rental that has 8 bedrooms.
Oh, yeah.
So your parking may be related to,
Sure.
things like bedrooms and not, so for instance, in dormitories and hotels, zoning ordinances will typically dictate your minimum parking based on the number of beds.
Right.
So that, there are things that we could do in that way.
Yeah.
As it relates to licensing, obviously, if we do decide to separate long-term from short-term, do you have a different fee for your long-term rental than your short-term? Do you increase, one of the things that host compliance told us from the time we started talking to them is that our license fee for short-term rentals is very low. And then there's the gross receipts rental tax. Do we want to look at different rates for whether it's short-term or long-term?
And there are communities along the Delaware Bay along the Delaware beaches that are doing that.
Yes.
They've already split it into 2 different tiers for short and long-term.
Yes.
With obviously the short-term rental being the higher.
Right, and we've looked internally at staff, and Melody did some additional research, and Carolyn has some stuff here. So we have, a number of ordinances, both local and, on a more national level that we can look at as we try to piece this stuff together.
Can I ask a question on that?
yeah.
When you're looking at ordinances, is there a criteria that you're using? Like, are you looking at ordinances for say, like, Santa Barbara? Or are you looking at ordinances for, say, like, Ocean City, Maryland?
I would say we'd look at any.
Absolutely.
Any place, so host compliance works with a number of communities throughout the country, and they advise on ordinances. So they would have some that they would say, this community's got a very successful program, and they'll be able to point us in that direction.
I guess
Chelsea?
my point is, what are we, what kind of town do we want to be?
That's the question for you guys.
Yeah, that's what we
I think you
So,
have.
I mean, what I'm saying is, before you come to us with model ordinances, I guess we need to define what do we want to be as a beach rental town?
Well, right, and that's why we're here now, because we didn't think that, while there are some ordinances we have in hand, we didn't think, before we answer some of these basic questions about what does mayor and council want in terms of, balancing our short-term tourism economy with our year-round resident community, those are questions that we kind of want you guys to give us the direction so we can then start to find the materials and draw from them.
The one thing I was thinking about the length of stay, though, I know that BB has a practice of having nurses and other healthcare workers in on, I don't know if they're 6, so it might be worth asking somebody be
Okay, we can do that,
what that
for
rotation.
And there could be exceptions for somebody who came as a healthcare worker.
Yes, absolutely.
That could be addressed. But I think in terms of looking at ordinances, you really need to look at comparable communities. So you need to look at other resort communities up and down the eastern seaboard. And certainly you've got places like Nantucket who've dealt with this for years. And other locations and up and down just the Delaware coast. We've got 6 other communities.
Right, so we have all of that, I mean, but again, until we know what, from a policy standpoint, what direction you want us to move in.
Yeah, I think it'd be rather foolish to look at a New York City regulation.
No, and we wouldn't, I mean, we're pretty good about knowing what a similarly situated community would be, but it might not only be coast. I mean, there are some,
Sure.
like ski communities that have very
Any tourist
similar
destination, yeah.
issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in some cases they might have more comparable populations to what we have.
Maybe. Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we'll look at, but, still, wherever we look, and through the American Planning Association, there will be, we have access to what's called the Planners Advisory Service, where we can, they can get us ordinances, articles, journal, all kinds of stuff, depending on, kind of where you all decide to take this. One thing, Mayor, you've mentioned, and I didn't put this in the PowerPoint, but one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that the long-term rentals are among the few
They're the
affordable.
They're the only affordable housing
right.
we have in this community.
So right now, there's no real incentive for people to go that route.
And we know for a fact, I mean, you could look at gross receipts history that have been paid for people who are paying gross receipt rents consistent with what the occupancy is. If someone's renting if somebody's renting on a year-round basis, chances are their gross rental receipts checks are going to be less than somebody who's renting on a short-term rental, because it's just the volume of turnover and the nightly rate versus a monthly rate. Right. So you have that as a kind of a guide or at least a clue as to who's doing short-term versus long-term rental. And I do believe that long-term rentals are really the only opportunity for people who are here and we're a community that has a fair amount of elderly people who are on fixed incomes that enjoy living here, and some of them have been displaced by the conversion from a long-term rental to a short-term rental.
Yep.
And that's why we need to make sure we define them.
Right. And again, because there is, it depends on how you look at it, because you can set a different GRRT rate for short-term versus long-term, regardless of whether you set a different rate. 5% of 100,000 is 5%. But it's still going to be more than the 5% on that long-term rental that you're not making nearly as much. So you can, depending on how you look at it as the policymakers, you can determine that just by virtue of the dollar amount being higher, the rate doesn't need to be different
Well, but your earlier points were well made in that, you've got more demand for city services.
right. Oh,
So
absolutely.
you've got to, you're offsetting, you got to offset some of those costs that we're talking about, twice a week trash pickup and
Right.
other things, by generating those that are generating it or that are causing it or contributing to it.
Right.
Absorb some of those costs.
Yep. So if you can go to the next slide. So where we are is just in terms of next steps. We want to determine the framework of what you would like to see in some sort of a program, if you want to see a program.
Well, the other thing, along with it, I think we need to hear from the stakeholders. Some are here today, and we need to hear from some more,
Right.
frankly, from the realtors.
Oh, yeah.
We're just starting this discussion. I know that you interviewed by RDE
this
today,
morning,
so I'm
yep.
sure I suspect there'll be a dialogue, but you're right.
I don't
We have
make
4
my
people here
framework
today.
before I hear what
Right.
the community really envisions.
Oh, that's where we're going to get it?
Yeah, all those things, like the length of the stay and,
Right.
you know.
And, I mean, we
Occupancy
could, so, what I've said here is the next step, we can work to determine which are short and which are long. I don't want to put the time into that if council doesn't.
Right.
At the very least, if we could determine if council wants to separate long and short, then we can start to,
So you said.
label them, figure out which falls into which bucket. We can work on a draft ordinance, or we can have feedback. We can have a series of kind of public events once we pull some information together. And then what I would hope, and who knows, depending on how things go, this may be too ambitious, we may have to push it another year, but my hope would be that with the adoption of the 2023 budget, we have something in place that would then go into effect for that fiscal year. So if there's a different license fee, that it would go into effect for that fiscal year, and that,
Well, we need to do it soon, because I can tell you that the realtors we went through this when we changed the gross rental receipts tax from 3% to 5%. So if we're going to do it, the realtors are already beginning to put out the 22 rental agreements.
Right.
So this is something, if we're going to take action on, we really need to take an action on it by December.
And I think the Finance Committee has been tasked with
Right.
giving an opinion on this, and they're to meet in October, I think.
So I think that time is of the essence if we want to do something in time for next
Right.
year.
Right.
So,
and that, I think ideally, that would be the way to go. And as you know, each year, there seems to be this legislation that finds its way and never goes anywhere, that would have the state implement a short-term rental tax, but it would also, the versions that have circulated in the past would also cap what local governments could do. And if,
Excuse me, may I interrupt you and ask you a question about that? With the capping, is the state expecting to share in the benefits of that collection of tax? No, so they're...
they would collect it and use it for their purposes, and with that, we would be capped what we could do. What they have said every time it comes up is that they will not do it in a way that hurts any municipality, so there would likely be some sort of grandfathering of whatever that rate is. But that's why, in my view, if we are going to do something that looks at adjusting that rate, the longer we wait, the more in jeopardy we are. Now, I can't imagine it's going to happen next year because it's an election year, but you never know.
Yeah.
well, we also have a county that's just been given authorization to collect a 3% rental tax, not on rentals,
Right.
house rentals.
Right.
And
Regardless of short-term or long-term?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Well, no, there's a short term, I think. With the county, I think it's short
Is
term.
it short term? I thought it was, okay. And I was on tourist homes and rentals, anyway.
Would that be on top of what Lewis is charging, or are they not
Yes.
paying? They're paying
Well,
8%?
no, it would be an what the county's authorization is, right, the unincorporated areas.
Municipals.
So what it would do is it would level the playing field so that you don't end up having the municipalities,
Yeah.
higher.
And the other thing is that all the short-term rentals currently are only paying 5% gross rental receipt tax. All the hotels, regardless of where they're locating, are paying an 8% accommodations tax.
Right.
So there's a discrepancy between short-term rental, what short-term rentals
That's
are being taxed
remarkable.
on the municipal level, where the state has already applied an 8% accommodations tax to hotels, regardless of whether they're in the city or out in the county.
Can I get a clarification on something?
Sure.
And I'm kind of in the weeds on this one, but my first question is regarding the collection of the gross rental tax. Is that paid to the city?
Yes.
That's what I thought. So if we're the collecting agent for that, and yet that is That's not subject to state level legislation, is that correct? Or it is?
What do you mean it's not subject to?
Respect.
Well, there's a, you talked about legislation.
Right,
that
okay,
was-
yeah, so it's not subject to that.
Right.
Right, it's
Okay.
within, we have taxing authority within the charter.
Right, that's what I wanted to clarify. So 100% of what is collected under gross rental receipts stays within the city?
Correct.
Correct, okay. So do I understand the purpose of what you're asking for us is to see if there's a consensus on interest in studying this subject matter and possibly cultivating a program? Is that the ask?
That is correct, and,
Okay.
and if, further, I would say, like Andrew mentioned, the importance of outreach before.
Absolutely.
Before the criteria are set, not, don't put it all together and then go outreach to have some stakeholder
The question you ask
workshops.
is the one you need. Are we interested in looking at separating long-term and short-term?
Right, I mean, that's the
Are we
basic
looking-
question.
And I think that's the basic question we need to answer tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we're not in a position to take a vote on it.
No.
There's no commitment, but
No.
are you asking?
Is there a consensus so staff can figure out how best to move forward to provide council with
Whether we should do it or not.
and we can easily create a website for the short-term rentals and put this PowerPoint presentation in a form for public to leave their comments. So we can start getting that information now.
And we can certainly reach out to the Sussex County Association of Realtors and say, just so you know, we're talking about this, and if we want to have, a stakeholder workshop where maybe we talk this much, but then we sit back and say, what do you think? Or we could have questionnaires, what would you support this?
Got a small audience here.
Right. I mean, and I would think if they have anything to say, we
Yeah.
Anybody want to speak?
gladly listen.
But before you speak, may I speak? Before I yield the floor.
The mic's not plugged in.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, it's a little hard to.
I do have a question I want to ask. We're in this period of study, and this is something that I'm going to throw out, and the people who are Zooming or here in person can react to this with their comments. One of the things that has concerned me is getting back to the city services that we provide, and specifically the trash pickup, the recycling pickup twice a week during the summer season. I've wondered if we should not go on a fee-based schedule for this service, with the idea that instead of providing the second pickup on a Thursday, Friday, actually do it on a Saturday, on that day when units are frequently being flipped. Because the reality is that if the homes are then being cleaned and the renters, the short-term renters, are evacuating the house, there's a lot of trash being produced during that exercise. The cleaners might be producing a lot of trash also. And it seems to me that if we could go on a fee schedule where the property owners would subscribe for trash pickup and recycling pickup on that day, that we would then take away the demand that we're finding in our public trash cans, where people invariably end up driving around looking for a public trash can to put their household trash in. And so on Saturdays and Sundays, those cans are overflowing.
right. It happens at the beach all the time.
It happens, right. And so if our customers, in this case, is the property owner who's renting out their property, it seems that we should be attuned to what their needs are, what their demands are, and let them just offset the costs for that service.
And they can pass it on if they want
I
to.
open it. Oh, yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But the critical thing is they would subscribe for the service.
It's a great idea.
Well, it's an idea, but I think you need to look at what the cost would be, because then you'd have to staff a full complement of street people
Absolutely.
to work on Saturday. That might be even a more expensive thing.
And that's why,
Well, that's why it's supposed to be
in
passed
the
on.
study period, we do a, and we figure out what our costs are, our operating costs, our labor costs are, et cetera, if there's overtime costs, all that would go into then what our subscription rate would be.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So are you suggesting that we go to a fully fee-based trash service or continue to have it included as part of your taxes, but if you want that second pickup on during the summer months, that would be an added charge?
That's what I'm thinking
Okay.
right now, because based upon what you said in your presentation, that full-time residents are don't have the need typically to have a second pickup.
Right. A lot of times they'll put their cans out, but it'll have a bag in it.
I
Right.
don't use it.
So, but we all know that the rental properties, there's lots of trash being produced in a 6-day.
Or a 3-day.
Or a 3-day, right.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other discussion to have, but it's sort of.
But it's something that, as we're putting numbers together, I'd like to see those numbers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to speak? Pam?
I think I'm fine. I wrote some notes down today, but I don't think I'm a problem for the town.
Can you come
Please
on
come up to the phone. Up to the phone.
because since everything
Susan,
is
please identify
virtual now, the
So we're
audience at
recording
home
all
needs to
this.
hear you.
Okay.
And
Well,
introduce
I'll read
yourself.
what I wrote, but I had no idea. I thought you were going to close us down or something.
I don't think so.
And with that.
Please identify yourself by street and street address.
Is this on?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
on.
Okay.
Can you pull it down a little?
Pull it down, you won't
Sorry.
break it. Just pull it.
It's bendy. It's bendy.
It's flexible. Yeah.
Here we go. Hi, I'm Amy Cleaver, and I have an Airbnb short-term rental on 310 Mulberry Street.
Oh, okay.
I've been coming to Lewis for 57 years. I've seen a lot of changes. Before I came here to live full-time, I couldn't wait to stop renting my house on a long-term basis. I hated being a landlord. Full-time renters tend to treat your house as if it's their own, which sometimes is not a good thing. So when I thought about short-term renting, I wanted to make sure I would be respectful of the community, my street, and my neighbors. My house rules are simple. And let me say, I have a one-bedroom, 1 to 2 people unit, and I live there. My house rules are simple. 1 to 2 people, no kids, no pets, no parties, no smoking or fires. I also have a driveway that can handle 10 cars. Now in my 5th year, it has been a better than expected experience and way to provide an income. I've stayed friends with many. I get Christmas cards, repeat guests, thank you notes, presents, and even wine. Every single guest loves Lewis, and I love to share my little town and little house. For these reasons, I support the ability to continue to rent this small portion of my house on a short-term basis. So,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don, did you want to say anything?
Janelle, you know what I didn't do is put up the map. Just go to the next slide, sorry. Okay.
Well, thank you all for talking about this topic. I know we've been thinking about this for years. We live at 12 Church Street. My name is Don Wong, and we used to walk out on our front stoop and see a family across the street with 3 kids live there full-time, another neighbor full-time, all full-time neighbors, and now we're surrounded by Airbnbs. I'm not here opposing Airbnbs. I'm here to try to support this effort to find a solution I think that we all can live with. Piggybacking on what Amy was saying, home sharing was the original intent behind the Airbnb model 10 or 15 years ago, whenever it started. Owner-occupied homes, primary residence were what it was all about.
That's right.
It helped an owner supplement their income, whether it was a room or, in Amy's case, it's half of her house being rented. And according to Airbnb, on their website, they say that most of the folks that are enrolled as hosts are low to moderate income. I don't know if that holds true in Lewis or not, if that same demographic fits here, but I think that they hype up the so-called sharing economy thing on Airbnb and maybe VRBO as well. But essentially, these are residential homes being used for commercial use. Insurance companies look at this as a commercial use. That tells you something, I believe. And in some cases, one of our neighbors, it's an investment property. Purely investment property. They live 5 hours away. They're never here.
Yeah.
It's purely investment. And they told us that, basically, when we moved in. So I've been a long-term resident. I'm also retiring as a professional planner this week. And I hope that this conversation continues and that the city develops some standards as they do with other businesses. I think you touched on the off-street parking requirements. I'm not sure what that's going to look like ultimately. I think that's a concern. We had a guest, or a host, the house across the street from us the other day had 4 cars and a boat on our little street.
And you have no off-street parking?
We have no off-street parking, no.
And I think the house across...
Only one neighbor has one off-street.
And I think there's one space across the street, isn't there? Yeah.
So as well as off-street parking requirements, I think looking at the permitted use, I think safety and fire standards, you hold an Airbnb to a certain standard, I'm sorry, a B&B to a certain standard,
Right.
Why not an Airbnb as well? And I'm going to leave Anne Marie and Janelle a copy of a study done in Durango, Colorado, that I read about, where they allow only 1 unit per residential segment. So they define a segment as 1 street. That's the way they control the density there. They've seen it. Long before what's happening here in Lewis, they've been seeing that issue because it's a town that's sort of come through a revival, and plus it's a college town. So we're supporting balancing the potential benefits of running a business out of your home, and also what are the impacts to the city and to the neighborhoods. So we walk out in the wintertime and our street is dark. It's dark from the neighbors not being around. So just some questions I'll leave you all with, and I
It
think
just takes away your community.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. It's
Yes.
going to take away your community.
And just some questions, I think, to add to this conversation. What is your role as government? What constitutes a business? And what are the impacts to tourism? Is it positive or negative? Because I've read studies where it's not a real net positive impact. It's a negative impact. And it's mostly affecting housing, as you've already talked about that. And I think preserving housing availability should be a community goal of Lewis, and I think we're missing the mark on that, so, thank you.
Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Congratulations on your
Congratulations
retirement.
on the retirement.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hey, Don,
absolutely.
may I ask you a question? Have you been impacted by the lack of peaceful coexistence with the people in the rental?
No, we've had no issues with noise or partying.
That has not been an issue for you at all?
I think the only thing is when there's maybe more people than should be in some of the units, there's a parking issue. There was a wedding party at 15 Church Street. There were 9 cars and a limousine there one time for that. So we were impacted that weekend.
Sure.
But for the most part, no, we're not impacted.
Thank you. Feeling a sense of lack of community because of the...
Absolutely.
I know exactly, I thought so, yeah.
Okay.
And that's why you moved here, and that's why you're here, because of community. But you feel like it's been
Absolutely. Yes.
slowly disintegrating.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, I got you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, do you have anything you wanted to add? Okay. Jeff?
No, I'm fine.
Great. Thank you for coming, taking time to come. Do we have anybody in the chat? Oops, we lost him.
Amy, do you mind answering just a couple of more questions about your situation?
Sure.
Do you mind coming up? I'm sorry. So you do, in a sense, cohabitate then with the folks you're renting to?
That's the only way I would do
Okay.
it.
And do you feel safe doing that, obviously?
That's very
I
different.
blocked it off.
Okay.
With doors. I wouldn't feel comfortable.
Have you ever had a situation, because you said 1 to 2, where they've showed up and there's 3 or 4 people?
No, a couple of situations they've asked to bring their
Okay.
adult children or child or something, and if that person wants to sleep on the couch, it's fine. But it's one bedroom.
But you never had to turn someone away because how they misrepresented themselves or anything?
People constantly, not constantly, but they try to sneak in with the perfect well-behaved dogs, the perfect well-behaved children.
They don't exist.
They think they can.
I agree. On both counts.
Yeah, I have to keep on it because somebody recently snuck in with a 7-year-old, which was fine, but I don't want children. It's not set up for children. I don't want pets.
And they've got their own accommodations in a sense of cooking and bathroom facilities, or
I don't have a kitchen. I didn't want a kitchen.
Okay.
I have a large mini fridge, coffee pot, microwave. They have their own bathroom. So they have the TV room right in front of it's just the first level of the old house. And they have that, and then the original dining room, or my old dining room, is now their bedroom, and I put in a new kitchen.
Was your area completely separate from
It
the...
is. It's an addition that I put on before
I
I
see.
decided to do the Airbnb, because right now it's just me there. So it's worked out great for me, and if they can't park on the street, they can use my driveway.
So you have
And do you do this year-round, or are you a summer, do you have a season?
Well, it's definitely seasonal for me, but I think this year I'm going to close. It's been so crazy busy this year.
You need a break.
I am going to take a winter break.
But Amy, you are only a 1-unit building.
Yes.
Okay, you're not a separate, because you don't have a kitchen, you're not a 2-unit building.
Right.
Okay. So yours is really a portion of your house, not a 2-unit building. And you're not renting the whole structure. So it's quite a different combination.
It's similar to what Don was speaking to, which the idea of Airbnb was that you're hosting
It's back to
someone,
what, it's back to what the core idea is.
It's like a true bed and breakfast where you're sharing the
I wasn't
kitchen.
interested in
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Right.
Mayor, there is George Slick would like to speak, and then Junior.
Okay.
Whoever they are.
Well, also, anybody who's identified themselves only by initials or by a phone number, if you would identify who you are,
Right, so
we could have record of who you are, it would be helpful. Okay, so let's bring George up.
and
Hello, Mayor Becker.
Hi, George.
Hi, I live at 5E at the Ocean House, and I don't live there permanently.
Right.
But we also have had discussions about rentals, and we have about 8 owners that currently rent on a weekly basis, and they're very, very few of them rent on a long-term basis. But what I would suggest is a couple of things. One, whatever decision you make should probably be data-driven, and I believe that the realtors in town could give you a really good picture of how many short-term versus long-term rentals they have. Because in our building, as far as I'm concerned, we've only had 1 unit, the unit below me, that was a long-term rental on a continuing basis. And the gentleman that spoke about BB Hospital is exactly right, because it's nurses that are usually there 6 months.
Right.
So I would suggest that perhaps you get a lot of help from the realtors in town. The other thing I'd like to say is that I'm not sure you should be in the trash collection business. We have 25 units, and when you put in the trash collection business, I checked on it, and I was told that we have to have 25 separate trash containers in our parking lot in order to get the city to pick up our trash. So we pay for our trash collection,
Right.
and we get a lot of contributions from a lot of different people who don't live there. And we don't appreciate those contributions, but we get them.
I'm aware of that kind of thing.
Particularly,
I'm aware of that, George.
and the other thing I'd like to say to you is that I I have the advantage of sitting on the fifth floor balcony overlooking the beach on a regular basis. And one of the things that has concerned me over time relates to the trash collection, and I feel sorry for the people who have to pick up the trash, because the people who use the beach and the people who bring their dogs to the beach also use the trash collections on the beach to deposit their dog manure. And that is really a quite common occurrence. And I'm wondering if perhaps, I don't know, if you perhaps put dog manure containers out there, that maybe somebody would use those instead of the trash cans, because it's really disgusting to me to see people use the trash cans as dog manure cans. The other thing I'd like to say to you is that I also see the people who rent from the old DeBrock property. I think there's 5 houses there that face the beach. I don't know why they do it, because they could have an individual trash can picked up by the city, but quite a few of those run across the street and deposit their trash in the beach, on the beach properties. So if in fact you discontinued the trash collection and made everybody have a contract with a trash collection agency, you don't even have to do it yourself, it would probably save you a lot of headaches. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
But I am happy that you're talking about the short-term, long-term rentals, because we are not happy about the short-term rentals that we have, but there's another concern, and that is a lot of these people buy these units to rent them. At least 2 or 3 of them are that way, I know, and some of it is incidental rentals, but I would imagine you would have to make some distinction between when you purchase the property and when this goes into effect, because I'm sure they would have to have some sort of grandfather clause.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, George. Appreciate your speaking up tonight. Anybody else there? JR, we need to know who JR is. Is it June Rose or is it someone else?
You should be able to unmute. Is it Judy Rolfe? Does it say Rolfe?
There you go.
Judy Rolfe.
Judy Rolfe, okay. Judy.
Judy Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E, and I live at 31 Heddle Open Gardens within Lewis proper.
Right.
Hey there.
I am an Airbnb host. I follow all the rules. I'm an on-site host. I have adequate parking. I have adequate recycling. I have no noise issues. I regularly check in with my neighbors to see if there's any issues with sound, noise, any kind of violation. I pay my Lewis grocery receipts every year. I'd like to be able to continue to have a short-term rental. It's a big help to me financially, especially this past year with the pandemic, where I lost 90% of my business. So Airbnb allowed me to be able to stay current on my mortgage. I think a lot, I can't speak for everybody, but the other hosts that I do speak to rely on this income quite a bit, lean on it quite a bit. One of the things I would like to put forward is, I'm hearing these issues about recycling and parking, and I want to address that a little bit in that this has been an ongoing problem for years, and there's small part of me that feels that just because we were late to the party, these short-term rentals and Airbnb, just because we were late to the party, it's somehow, this is something that we're supposed to shoulder. Without going on a tangent, as Mayor Becker knows that I can do, there's actually some developments that we're all very familiar with, that we have a lot of attached villas / townhome developments that are going in. One in particular, I believe, on New Road, that I won't mention, where there's not even available street parking for those units.
Right.
it's not available. So I'm a little defensive in trying to stand up for some of these issues that have come up with Airbnb. I know that there's something that could be worked out that would benefit all of us. I worry, one of the things I worry about also, you can cut me off anytime, Mayor Becker. But one of the things I worry about is if you pull the plug on Airbnb, I think you might find that you might have a lot of clandestine rentals where nobody's benefiting. You know, the city won't be collecting its gross receipts, and, you know, the state won't be, and the IRS won't be getting their share either, because these will go clandestine and people will just rent anyway.
Okay.
I think you need to consider that. The other thing I'd like to propose is, I too have issues with Airbnb. I've been reading a lot of these same articles that several of you have mentioned, and I think one way to maybe get a leg up on this is, I don't know how we do it, but don't allow some of these corporations in investor properties where, you know, that it be required that you be on site or live within the community that your short-term rental is in. I have an issue with these companies that, you know, aren't even on the East Coast that have these short-term rentals, and they're managed by, you know, companies. Okay, I'll stop for now. I think maybe the public might want to weigh in on short-term versus long-term. I think you need to hear their voice on that instead of just you all voting on that, to have some input on that. I look forward to the future public meetings. I would like to be part of those.
Okay. There won't be public.
Today, I would have been there at the meeting physically if I had known that we could have spoken out. So I appreciate this opportunity to speak out, even if it was on Zoom.
No problem.
And thank you for your attention to trying to resolve this problem. I hope we can work together so that it benefits all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy, just a couple of things for you. You said you're an on-site, you're a host that's on-site. Does that mean you own a unit that's next door, or are you actually, like Amy was saying, are you actually renting part of your home to an Airbnb customer?
I'm renting my entire home, and I bunk someplace else so that I can rent my place.
Okay, that's fine.
I am on-site, I check people in and out, and I frequently, you know, I'm a very hands-on, communicative
Yep, we know that.
host.
Okay. And the other comment was, I think that we're not talking about eliminating short-term rentals. We're just talking about how to manage them. So I don't want anyone who's listening tonight or anybody from the media to misconstrue what we're talking about. We're not talking about eliminating them. We're talking about how to manage going forward. So if that was a concern of yours, which I think I heard, please rest assured that that's not the purpose of this conversation.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who wants to speak? Okay.
The other thing that strikes me, just listening to Amy, is that the more what Airbnb started as is still happening, and that
I didn't know that was the model.
right. So it's interesting because I think, in my mind, I was thinking about people renting their whole homes. And short-term, long-term, this might be it might be that there are three different things, because if you're on site and have somebody in your home, that's much different than if you are doing what Don's talked about on his street, where you're 5 hours away, and so it seems like there are a number of things, and so as we kind of look around at what other places are doing, we can look and see if there are places that deal with that type of situation differently, because I think it is different, because it's not a family of 10 coming and parking all over the street. It's much more.
Can I say something else?
Sure, go by the microphone.
Okay. As I've been also a guest of Airbnb, and I live on Mulberry Street, I have issues with the people that buy the houses for an investment, because I'm the one that suffers as a neighbor. And there's one a couple of doors down from me, I have found the guest dogs in my backyard. The noise, because I'm surrounded by, my parcel's 200 feet, and I have 5 houses that, on the side of the back.
That's your property, yeah.
That touch my property, and I think I have 4 in-ground pools, so that's a new level, which is fine, but when they rent it, it's a party.
Right.
And then we have the dogs and things like that. So when the renters claim they can fit 10 people, that's 4 cars and a couple dogs and lots of kids and lots of noise. So maybe there should be rules for them as well.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think, what I'm hearing and kind of feeling is this is really the beginning of a conversation that will continue to play out over the next several months.
I think we need to play it out fairly quickly.
Right.
Fast track.
So,
This is a project that we need to, if we want to put it in place for the 22 season, as I said, we really need to define this by the end of December.
So what I think we'll do is our staff will, with tonight fresh in our mind, kind of talk about what we would propose for next steps, and maybe provide on the October 11th agenda kind of an update and a proposed, this is what we would suggest for how to move forward.
I think one of the things to consider with this is, we're talking about parking and inventory and that kind of thing, is delineating the parking in areas that it's not currently. Because how else are you going to really determine, where people should be parking? And that's an issue in general.
That's a different project we're working on.
That's another.
They're not aware of.
We got a real good education in terms of the type of what Airbnb is, and what Amy was saying and what Dawn was saying. I was not aware that, we have to define the one where you are there and it's your home. That's a hell of a lot different than one where you're renting out and you're not around. So, if that's like night and day, she knows what's going on.
Right. I think as you reach out to the realtors to tell them that you want input, you also need to advise the realtors now that we're considering a possibility, and so that we don't put them in a position where they've already published contracts saying it's 5%, when we may end up with a different percentage, so, or we may have a different policy.
We have to move fast.
So I think the sooner we put the realtors on notice as we move to the end of the tourist season, and look towards next year, the better.
Do we know if, the gentleman, George, he lives in Ocean House, right? Which I assume has an HOA.
Right.
But do you know if, say, Pilot Town Village HOA has already a rental policy for?
We can certainly reach out to the HOAs to find out.
I don't think they do.
They don't. Okay.
I know Canary Creek has their HOA.
It might be, if they do and it's working for them, it might be worth.
Good model.
I think Denniston Place has a.
Well, so I would be surprised, actually, if some of the HOAs, when you look at like the Pilot Towns, I'd be surprised if they don't have a prohibition altogether on short-term rentals. But I can find out. We can put together a short questionnaire to send to the HOAs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I speak to that, Mayor?
Yeah, sure, George, what you got?
One of the things, George Slick again from the Ocean House. One of the things that a lot of people are not aware of is that if in fact you buy a property in a condominium that has a high percentage of rental units, it's very difficult to get a mortgage.
Yes.
And that is something we've tried to maintain a low percentage of units that rent, because we would like to have our units to be saleable into the future. And so that's a consideration that a lot of people are not aware of, but we are certainly aware of it. And one of the things that you probably know, there's a long history with the Ocean House, we were required to buy an additional lot on Savannah Road when that building was built to accommodate the parking. And we are very, very cognizant of the parking problem, because we get spillover from your $2 an hour parking lot. You know, I'm looking
No, no. It's yours too.
Come on, George.
You also have a very, very valuable parking lot.
So it looks like Judy's hand's up as well.
Okay, thanks. Did you have anything else, George, before we let Judy back on again?
No.
Okay, great. Judy, what you got?
I hit it by mistake, sorry.
Okay. All right. All right, if there's no, yes, Jeff?
A few comments.
Okay, Jeff, please.
I'm Jeff Williamson. I live on New Road. I have an Airbnb at 325 Mulberry. I am an example of someone who I don't share my space because I don't need to. It's empty. It's 2,500 square feet. It's 4 bedrooms. It's huge. It's very spacious. And my wife and I have spent a lot of money putting it together. People who come in, I screen everybody who comes in, and if I don't think it's appropriate, I decline to rent to them. I meet everyone. No one comes in without meeting me physically. I can make sure this is who I've arranged to rent the space to. I would say across the board, people love Lewis. They love our unit. They take such good care of it that often I walk in when they've left and I say to myself, I don't even have to clean this place. Of course I do. I have professional cleaners come in. But that's how, I've never had anything even out of place.
Right.
And I do not rent to, I don't rent to high school students. I've had students beg me for the place. I don't rent it to them. I don't rent even to college students. If there's going to be an infant and a toddler or a toddler, I say we need to discuss this because it's not really appropriate. And most of the people, everybody I rent to is professional, they're educated, they're sophisticated, and they love the opportunity to stay right near downtown and have such a nice unit. So we've had no problems. In about the 4 years I've been doing it, I've had not one single complaint from either the 2 other owners in that building or any of my neighbors, including Don. Never heard anything from him that had indicated he was not happy with what we're doing.
Yeah. Great.
I have a question.
Sure.
And you might have said this, so I apologize if I missed it. Do you have off-street parking for that unit?
I do.
You do, so,
Yeah.
okay.
I do.
Yeah. There is off-street parking for that building, yeah.
So
Those are big units.
They're huge.
They are
Right, so
huge units.
that's one of the things in that tight area that makes all the difference, I
I
think.
understand the issue, particularly on Mulberry Street,
Right.
Yeah.
which now, I expect one day they're going to have to turn into a one-way street. It's hard to get.
Yeah, it's 2 cars are hard.
Trucks to get
Yeah.
down there.
Right.
So I understand that issue.
So, okay, now I'm just trying to make sure that I come away with, like, knowledge,
Yeah.
full knowledge.
I live 5 blocks away.
Right.
I can walk between the 2 places, which
Right.
either my wife or I does virtually every day.
Yeah.
Right.
They're walking the dog.
When you're walking the dogs, yeah, your beautiful dogs, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Jeff, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I know the building where your unit is located. I've often wondered how many units are in that building. Did you say a total of 3 units? 3 units. And there is that, I know the little parking lot that's adjacent to the building, that's sufficient to meet the demands of?
The unit, I'm in unit number 1, which is the first floor of the building.
I see.
Unit number 2, which enters on Mulberry Street, the front door, they do not have access to the driveway. I mean, the parking lot.
Okay,
Only units 2 and 1 and 3.
I see.
So I have back-to-back, I can get 2 cars in. Unit 3.
You have 4 spaces. The building has 4
There's 4
spaces.
spaces.
Right, and 2 of them are yours.
That's
You
correct.
could- Got it. Thank you very much. I never understood that about the building.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it. All right, anybody else speak up while Jeff was speaking?
No, sir.
Okay. If we have no other comment tonight, there's a lot of good discussion here tonight, a lot of things to investigate, but we do have a time of the essence issue here. So thank you all very much for taking time to come, and thank you for those of you who chose to tune in by Zoom.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that will be continued. We'll have an update, I guess, on October the 11th, which is 2 weeks from tonight. It'll be part of the regular city council meeting, and then I'm sure in the meantime, we'll be getting some information out to HOAs and putting something out, probably on our website, seeking additional input from the public. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
How about a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hope you enjoy a wonderful evening. It's pretty nice out there.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Thank you all.
Ted, I'm gonna send this is what these stamps and first of all, they're getting a fee on the front. And that makes
Yeah, it's
people register
crazy,
to
right?
know what's out there.
I know, I talked to you about myself.
This is,